So with this long-term solutions in renewable energy and urban development in industrial zones is really at the core of this project. So the concrete concepts that are developed in part of this process, they are available also for example, in the international dialogue. So COP processes, G7, G20 dialogues, for example, for replication and scale-up processes. So we also have a folder here with examples that have been conducted globally. So feel free to take a folder away as well, which are next to the drink section. I also wanted to show a quick movie about the project. We have to get the submission back. We practiced it.
Better protect Brea against possible natural hazards. There are 5 steps. 1. Risk prevention. Meet Brea. Brea works as a small hotel owner, renting rooms to people who visit her town, known for its beautiful nature and fresh produce. However, life there is not always easy, as her home is prone to hurricanes and flooding. These natural hazards can greatly damage people's houses, businesses, and resources, and can even push them into a poverty trap. But it doesn't have to be like this. As the frequency and intensity of natural hazards continue to increase, more and more experiences have been made on how to increase resilience to these events with the help of insurance and other risk transfer instruments. To better protect Brea against possible natural hazards, there are 5 steps. 1. Risk prevention. 2. Addressing of residual risk. 3. Preparing. 4. Responding. And 5. Recovering. These steps are all part of a disaster risk management approach that integrates risk transfer solutions. 1. Prevention. The first thing that should be done to help prevent serious damage is a risk analysis, which identifies the hazards in a specific area and analyzes how exposed the people, businesses, agricultural fields, and infrastructure are. This analysis will reveal what can be done to prevent damage and feed into the risk transfer instruments and early warning systems in the next phases. In this area of prevention, Brea can strengthen her hotel and home with stronger materials to make them more resistant to wind. Her community can work together to plant trees, build a wall to protect farmland and infrastructure from heavy rain, or clean drainage systems to prevent flooding. The government can implement and enforce land use restrictions to ensure that people don't build in flood-prone areas. 2. Addressing residual risk. However, even if you put all preventive measures in place, some residual risk still remains. This is where ex-ante financing, that is, financing before a hazard strikes, can help. As an individual, Brea can take out a microinsurance policy in case her hotel is damaged. Weather index insurance could be a good option for the farmers in Bea's community, which will pay out when there has been too much or too little rain throughout the year. If Bea and her community do not manage these risks ex ante but ex post, that is, after a hazard strikes, then they will be forced to rely on friends and families, savings, or additional borrowings. The government can also protect their citizens with pre-disaster financing using contingent debt facilities, which ensure that funding will be available immediately after a hazard hits and by taking out their own insurance. This money can then be used to provide emergency relief to the people or support reconstruction. If governments plan how to manage the financial consequences of a natural hazard, they will not need to manage ad hoc and rely on donor assistance, additional taxes, budget shifts, or taking out credit from external actors. Implementing different prevention measures will greatly help in reducing the cost of these types of insurance and financial instruments because they significantly reduce the overall risk exposure. 3. Preparing. After Mia and her community protect themselves with ex-ante financing, they need to prepare themselves for the natural hazards. They can do this by stockpiling food and water in case of an emergency and making sure that they have a safe place to go should a flood or hurricane come their way. The government can also train individuals in rescue and emergency services, establish early warning systems, and come up with a contingency plan to ensure that everyone knows what to do. Adaptation investments, that is, investments made to help countries adapt to climate change, microcredit, and increasing savings, could also be good options for the government to better prepare. 4. Responding. When a natural hazard hits, Mia, her community, and the government enter the response phase. It is essential to respond quickly to avoid further loss of human life or material damage. They can do this by helping with the search and rescue effort, providing temporary shelter and food, and quickly repairing the most needed infrastructure. The ex-ante financing will play a big role in making this quick response possible. It may also be necessary to acquire some ex-post financing by increasing taxes, reallocating national budgets, or taking out credit. Without this financing, it can be very difficult for people and the government to get back on their feet. 5. Recovering. Now that Mia has responded to the first impacts of the disaster, she can start the recovery process. The good news is that with the right assistance, her savings, and possible payouts from her insurance, she can start to build back better. This can be done by examining the affected areas and repairing things in a smarter way that prevents these damages from happening again. All these steps are linked to each other and are most effective when countries and their governments, communities, and individuals work together. When everyone knows what should be done to prepare for a natural hazard, the consequences will be much less severe. Thanks to this disaster risk management approach and integrated risk transfer solutions, like insurance, Mia and her community will be more resilient and can make sure that these natural hazards never turn into disasters.
Okay, that was just a film we have produced as part of this project, which focuses here on the hotel sector, but it's equally applicable to other sectors, of course, the agricultural sector, or perhaps also with some imagination, renewable energy sector. This is just to highlight really the overall framework that we've developed in this project. So this is also this is the framework again, and later on we'll ask you to also identify which sectors of this perhaps this traditional disaster risk management framework with prevent, prepare, respond, recover, but also the residual risk, which is represented by the insurance sector or the risk transfer options. Which sector would you then be mostly associated with? So we'll place this later on the board, so you can mark where you see yourself mostly responding to and which other departments you're mostly connected to. So having talked about these projects, I want to now go into the project in Barbados specifically. So here we're really very much looking at a new sector, as was mentioned before, and this project is particularly exciting because it's looking at a classic greenhouse gas reduction sector with renewable energy, but also adapting it to climate change. So in a sense, that's what excites me most about this project. It's a double whammy, really excellent, innovative project. So the current status in Barbados, as you all are quite well aware of, is that total installed capacity momentarily is about 240 megawatts. Peak demand is about 157, and so currently installed capacity is about 19. So there's a gap, obviously, which will be with the new projects coming online, which will be filled, but also will be filled over the next short to longer term. So currently with quite a strong greenhouse gas fossil fuel energy generation, this is of course already politically stated, and approaches have been made even for about 100% renewable energy target, just like sister islands in the region have already proposed as well. So with this, of course, it's important to make sure that infrastructure that's currently not yet built, to make it climate resilient. So this is at the core of this project. Given the 29% target or the 65 renewable energy peak demand, and that should be installed by 2030. And the private sector also is stated in the nationally determined contributions, so this is the end process. They're also specifically stipulating that the private sector contributes in this and plays a strong role. So having said that, the project really is to develop this roadmap that ensures that the existing and future energy generation, as well as transmission and distribution, is climate resilient. And we are proposing to use this integrated approach as a framework where this can be achieved. So the roadmap should include aspects of disaster risk management practices, also of course risk reduction measures. The role of insurance should play a role in this as well as preparedness and response planning. So, and this is all, as we've heard in the introductory words, of course, also in light of the recent hurricane season. But I mean, this project was already set up late 2015, so it's not that cyclones, just because they don't happen right now, they will go away. I guess I've learned here that God is Barbadian, so which I've of course followed very closely this recent cyclone season, and yeah, but other islands have not been as blessed. So, for example, in St. Martin, when Hurricane Irma hit there, 60% of the houses were totally inhabited and power blackouts. However, on the positive side, and I very much think of these projects as can do positive things. If you think about it, that 90% of the PV rooftop installation, they actually withstood 280 km per hour winds. So that's pretty much something to, yeah, I think so too. It's quite amazing how well they must have been constructed. Dominica, on the other side, fared not as lucky as you are probably more aware of than I am, but from what I read was the Prime Minister said it was brutally hit with a Cat 5 category, so they sustained winds of 260 kilometers per hour. And what's really, there's still much of the island still remain without power today, and 90% of the structures in this island have lost their roofs or lost some capacity to shelter people. So here the aspect of saving lives and livelihoods, but most of the lives is really at the core of it. So it'll be important to see how they're rebuilding, because they can build back better. They really can. They have with this disaster have I dare say an opportunity to change things and transform things to be more resilient. Haiti also, with Cyclone Matthew, was also not a good case. It lost also 40% of his panels in that storm. But I think St. Martin is very much an island to look for what they've been successfully implementing there. Coming more closer to home in Barbados, Cyclone Harvey also caused some damage, and if you look at the wind gusts, they were quite a magnitude lower than on the other islands. However, also flooding here caused one house to swept away by the water, and some houses also lost their roofs due to high wind gusts. So these are just indicators what might be vulnerabilities and where further work or further work and activities could continue to improve the situation and make this more resilient. So power outages were also reported in that storm, and all this behind the backdrop of Barbados being a lucky country with the cyclone season so far, because the last major impact was in 1955. So it's been a while. Looking at the season this year also, CRIF, the Caribbean CRIF, the Caribbean Climate Insurance Facility, had payouts in the region for over $50 million US dollars. So this number itself is actually representing 40% since its initiation. So this season was very unusual since 2007, given the large payouts just this season. But also Barbados has received previously payouts from PRIF. So Hurricane Thomas was 8.5 million, and flooding in 2014 and 11 payouts were about 1.3 million, and Hurricane Matthew about 1.7 million. But behind this backdrop, one also needs to consider that cyclones are, as Misha mentioned in her opening speech, the intensity is increasing. So there are more ways to adapt than looking at financial protection, of course. And we've found that insurance actually can also fail as an enabler for risk reduction, because often the price of insurance is the only driver and it's not the risk itself. So risk-based premiums are not necessarily the priority, we have found out. There's also the fact that given it's a small island, Barbados, there are numerous projects and activities going on. I'm very well aware and of your limited time to dedicate to certain projects and the amount of work that's going on in the region. So with our risk transfer project, we were looking at the integrated risk transfer, which would actually soften the impact, the financial impact, through timely financial assistance after the disaster, but also looking at how this could effectively increase the response measures and contingency plans, as well as seeing how the adaptive measures before the storm could perhaps be financed or reduced to have longer-term development, to avoid longer-term development setbacks. So looking at this in a very comprehensive risk management approach is the aim. With the role of insurance, it should be mentioned that insurance can positively contribute to risk reduction, and it can provide incentives to policyholders to reduce their risk profiles. So, for example, in Australia, a lot of projects have been going on lately. And they were looking at very much individual households, how can they reduce their risk, and with that also comes a premium reduction. So there are ways where individuals are able to minimize their risk and also have a financial reward from it. Insurance can also be framed as a social policy to manage the risk. So because it's a pool of money where you basically hoping you won't have an impact, but you're basically cross-subsidizing the misfortune of other people. So it is a social policy in itself, and also it works through government measures to reduce and avoid risk. So there is a strong link with insurance and government to work together. Also to provide cover. So, example, in Australia, some areas, insurance wouldn't just provide any cover anymore for flood damage because flood happen fairly regularly. So this ultimately then falls back onto the government, which is also not an ideal situation. I also wanted to say that insurance also can fail to act as an enabler, because if discounted or cross-subsidized premiums are offered and they actually fail to enable betterment after the disaster, then an improvement has also not been achieved. So there's also the emphasis on insurance companies to have flexibilities in their policies when policyholders want to improve their current status, so they're actually able to or have that flexibility. And most of it's really how effective insurance can be. It can only be effective if it's linked to a broader national resilience approach. So it needs to be part of it. And with that, I want to highlight a few examples of the case in Barbados. So this is also in the fact sheets that we've put on the tables, because it's a very complex topic, and I'm aware of that. These are very specific examples on what particularly concrete initiatives could be taken and concrete steps could be taken instead of scientific studies or other documents. So it's very much looking at different opportunities that may exist and that could be followed through. So, for example, in the recovery section, we've been talking about the building standards. Perhaps that might be a way to go forward to increase the resilience. And there's been yesterday in the media was wind engineering head of the wind engineering also proposing that this topic of the standards and the code should perhaps be taken up again to increase the resilience. Of course, it's also looking at what do we know about vulnerability currently. How well do we understand the risk as such? The exposure, the hazard, and the vulnerability. These are the components. Only when you understand them, you can try and improve where the priorities lie, or where you can see where the priorities lie. Yeah. So with this, I just want to briefly here show the roadmap again. So we've seen now a few times our enhanced disaster risk management framework, which is highlighted here. We have in 2017 conducted a scoping study, which is the grey circle around this. So Nick Granger will be presenting on results about this shortly to give you a bit more background of where we're at. We've been also working closely with Brea on perhaps the idea of developing an insurance and finance toolkit to enable the uptake of renewable energy to different sectors and actors. And I mentioned already the building codes, which could also be some topic that might be important. I see some people nodding in the audience, so it's very much an open discussion still on where this roadmap will lead, and we'd like to discuss it with you, of course. So in 2018, then there'll be another consultation again. Is this going in the right direction? Is this moving the right way? And there are also further opportunities for activities. So it's very much up to you where you see this going, what should be done and what can be done. So ultimately then we want to have a very specific roadmap in 2018, so that's the yellow or golden ring around the DRM cycle there. So with that, I've already mentioned the ideas we're having, perhaps, which we'll also discuss later on, and that leaves me basically now to release you all for coffee. So after coffee, we'll have a presentation by Nick Granger, as I mentioned. So he'll be presenting his results, and that's it from me. Thank you very much, and awesome. Thank you.